In this episode of The Alternate Path, I got the opportunity to speak to Eucalyptus Head of Engineering, Davina, an online healthcare scale-up based in Sydney that's trying to bring higher touch, better healthcare for everyone. And now they're backed by the legendary Mary Meeker's Bond Capital. Mary Meeker is one of the true OGs in the internet space. The only other Aussie company Bond Capital have backed is Canva. So that should tell you the level of faith in Eucalyptus to bring better healthcare to the world. Now back to this episode's guest, Davina. She is ex-Googler, ex-Atlassian, and now leading Eucalyptus engineering team. We talked about what it was like getting into big tech, whether you should generalize or specialize, and what it was like transitioning from an individual contributor to a manager. On top of all of that, we talked about what financial independence means to her and how her philosophy around money have evolved over time. I am your host, David Kwan. Please enjoy my conversation with Davina. So Davina, I think a really good place to actually start our conversation is that everyone have a very different vision and motivation in joining tech. Maybe you can share a little bit more about your inspiration of joining tech in the first place.
For sure. Yeah, I think for me it was quite environmental. Both my parents were in tech, and naturally our household was quite tech literate. I remember we had a computer at home, and just having it in my environment, I think, just led me to be curious about tech, like playing around on the computer, playing games on the computer, using like Microsoft Paint. I just thought it was really cool to be able to type stuff on a keyboard or like move your mouse around. And it was just magic to me. And I think that kind of sparked my interest in wanting to pursue some sort of career there. And once I started meeting people in the community, I thought these people were really my people, and like I really vibed with them, and that kind of solidified my choice to pursue working in there full time. And yeah, I ended up studying computer science and had a pretty traditional path. Working towards big tech, internships, and full time roles was what I was aiming for during uni. And I went through that journey. And I think towards the end was interested in what was beyond that. But I guess for the most part, it was a pretty traditional tech path.
So I think what was really interesting is that before we talk about like the big tech path, the two things I actually want to explore. One thing is that I found a Prezi slide in 2010 on past, present, and emerging technologies. I won't share the slides, but it was on the theme of books. And it was so relevant because you were talking about the history and evolution of books, from recording information on tablets to physical paper to ebooks, and then ultimately to Google Books, which ultimately I think that forms the foundation of the search engine, if that's a fair observation. And then 4 years later, you went to intern in Google. So maybe tell us a little bit more about the inspiration behind the slide deck and the practical steps that you did to intern in Google.
So that project I did as part of a school project, and that was really focused around processes and how technology came to be. And I really enjoy understanding the history of tech, because technology in the past, like I remember when I was in school, like I grew up in the 90s, so smartphones were just becoming a thing, and being able to access the internet on your phone was wild back then. And I remember like trying to conserve my data as well when I was like using my phone and the internet, because it just like was such a new thing. So just seeing how trends have progressed over time is super interesting. And the smartphone itself arose from PDAs as well. So to see the trends of physical kind of paper-based books to now there's even audiobooks, and it's just like transcended through time. But I think technology is really good at adapting to the world, and it's really why I love working in tech, because there's so many industries that need technology that we know today is it's like there's so many different things that apply to tech. So yeah, I think it's funny when you mentioned that I did this presentation that was talking about Google and then I ended up working there. I think in terms of practical steps to interning at Google, I guess for context, I interned there 3 times, and that was about it's going back now, like maybe 7 years ago or something. For me, I really value learning practically, and internships are obviously a great way to get practical work experience. And I just did a lot of research around what internships are out there. I think be creative with how you look for internships. Like there might be diversity programs, there might be domain specific internships that cater to your interests. There might be companies out there that maybe aren't really looking for interns, but there's no harm in messaging and seeing what's on the horizon. So I saw that Google was doing applications for it, and I understood like when the timelines were, so I could work towards the deadline. I think leading up towards that, it's important to show as an intern like your passion for the space, obviously, and I think it's quite competitive now. So doing any side projects or doing hackathons or even school projects, like just really showing that you're passionate about tech and having examples of that is really useful. And then also, even nowadays, the cultural aspect of someone who works in tech is being more and more valued, which is something I've seen grow over time. So showing your teamwork and leadership skills through your extracurricular activities is always a good thing. And then being able to demonstrate that in the interview is awesome. And then I think in terms of preparation for technical interviews specifically, do lots and lots of practice. Like do mock interviews if you can through like your uni societies or any kind of like programs that are out there. Try and get as much practical practice as possible, because then when you go into the interview, you have a feel for like what you need to do. And one thing to remember in the interview itself is always talk through the problem solving process. I think that is really a good way for the interviewer to understand like where your head's at, instead of you just silently hacking away at the question. And then from there, just be calm, be confident. If you've prepared, there's no need to get flustered, and just show them what you've got.
I think it's really interesting on like the side project point, especially around interest, because it seems like there are a lot of applications or job applications now where it's like, I'm interested in this, but what have you done in showing that you have interest in this particular field? I think side projects is like you mentioned, is one of the very good ways to both practice and also show that you're actually interested in this thing.
Definitely.
So before we actually talk about the journey into big tech, which you already started talking, I realized that in your professional career, there's actually a moment in time before big tech in animal logic, which is all around animation.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think I've always been interested in animation. My friends and my colleagues know this about me, because I remember watching Pixar movies growing up, and they're very emotional. They get at your heartstrings, and I really wanted to be able to do that with my day job, like making people feel something. I don't know. I think that's really cool. So, the classics, like my favorite would probably be Ratatouille. Do you have a favorite Pixar movie?
That is, I actually just watched that like a couple of days ago.
What?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like my 6th time. There's just something about that, like it's quite special.
Yeah, just the cinematography and the music as well. I don't know, it's just like a perfect blend of art, and to me, animation, especially 3D animation, is a really good blend of the creative and the technical, which I love. And yeah, I think I was really keen to explore what that could potentially look like and what a career in animation could potentially be. So I think I applied to it was like a 1-week work experience thing that they were offering, and I was able to go to the studio. And for those who don't know, Animal Logic worked on Happy Feet, and they do like a lot of special effects stuff for a bunch of different movies. I was able to meet some of the animators and some of the people from the different stages of the animation pipeline, which I thought was really cool. I didn't really realize that's how animation works. Like there's whole lighting and texturing and modeling, and there's a specific order that you go through. So yeah, I was able to immerse myself in that and really get to walk through the halls of what could be maybe somewhere that I aspire to work at in the future. But yeah, I think I ended up doing a 3D animation course at uni, and I just found that it wasn't really suited to my skill set. I think I was more into the programming, and I guess the artistic side of drawing and turning that into a model was quite difficult. I think it takes a lot of patience, a lot of practice to be a really good animator. I mean, I don't really know because I'm not an animator, but that's how I felt when I was trying to do it. So I stuck to my guns, and I was really passionate about seeing how far I could go with more computer science style, I guess, work. So yeah, that's my little animation stint, but it could still be on the cards. It could still be there for me in the future. And I remember I went to the US and made a specific trip to the Pixar HQ just because I wanted to see it in the flesh. And it's like in this weird little town in the US, like very like obscured from, I don't know, like the main streets. And I remember it was all locked up. Like I couldn't actually go inside or anything. Like it was like gates like around it. And I just remember like peering through the gates. I was like, oh my gosh. So yeah, maybe one day. But I think what's cool is Pixar actually started as a tech company. So yeah, again, tech is everywhere, and wherever you start in tech, you may end up in a different industry or a different kind of pathway, but having tech like in your pocket and something that you're truly passionate about, it's quite flexible, like where you take your path, really.
I'm gonna double click on that because as you discover things that you really enjoyed on the engineering path, you then became, from interning in Google, you then became an engineer in Atlassian, which took me a while, but I realized that you actually got a patent on systems and methods for tracking source code deployments. And then you took a turn to go from a giant to a startup. What was that journey like, being able to contribute to a patent while you're still relatively early in your professional career? I have a follow-up question to that. Maybe let's go with that part first. And feel free to share any, like, if you want to bust any myths or like you want to give practical tips in terms of like what that journey is like to do really great in a big company and an established system, feel free to.
Yeah, so I guess I absolutely loved working at Atlassian. I was there for almost 4 years. I joined there as a grad after interning there 2 times, and I ended up staying with the team that I was interning with, and that was a CI/CD tool. And the pattern was like a huge team effort, and I was just able to be surrounded by brilliant engineers, like super, super talented, super smart, and super nice. And I loved working with them. And yeah, I think as a grad, kind of moving throughout the engineering levels from like junior to mid, I think I tried to find out what I was interested in and what responsibilities I could get in the team. And
Mm.
it does, I guess it does vary between companies, but in general, from what I've seen, we do try to treat juniors and mids, as if they're a really integral part of the team, because they are. Because they're not as experienced doesn't mean they can't bring as much to the table, like fresh perspectives and new ways of thinking about how we can solve problems. I think that is a really crucial part of why we need to have diverse teams with people of varying levels. I think for me, I was really interested in the process stuff and the management stuff, which, kind of led me to the role that I'm in today. And I really wanted to explore that more. So I asked for opportunities to lead some rituals like stand-ups and retros. I really loved feature leading, which is like managing a project. And I really tried to get involved in projects that were cross team. So
Mm.
being able to work with stakeholders and just understand more about the world of what my team was working on rather than trying to just be isolated on my specific tasks at hand. I think taking initiative and go beyond expectations in that sense really helps with proving to yourself that you can do this, but also it's a great reflection to your manager and like your teammates that you can do a good job. And yeah, I think in terms of practical tips, I think, yeah, be clear about what you want to grow in, like work on a career plan with your manager, and then have really clear expectations on where you can grow and what is coming up that you can potentially own, and try and take on that ownership. I think having ownership is huge for getting responsibility, but also staying motivated for yourself. And yeah, I think in my experience, like trying to network as well is really, for me, it's like really important because I really love meeting other people in tech. And I've crossed paths with people I went to uni with, people I interned with people I worked with. Like, it's such a small world. And I think it's really
Mm.
rich to be able to meet so many different people and really understand about their experiences and like what they're going through. And maybe you can learn from them as well. Yeah. And I guess those are the main things I would highlight from big tech, I guess, as things that I would suggest someone starting out in their career should do.
Yeah. And what was that transition like, going from like big tech with established systems, well-oiled machine, into something that like maybe is just starting to form or take shape?
Yeah, it was pretty overwhelming, actually. I think I'm someone who loves structure, who loves organization, loves process. So coming from that to somewhere that doesn't really have those things in place was quite an adjustment. I remember when I joined Eucalyptus, which is the startup that I'm at now, they used post-it notes on a wall for their issue tracking. And I was like, oh, okay, this is cool. That's fine. Have you guys heard of like Jira or Trello? And then eventually we adopted those tools. And I think what was really, really awesome for me was to be able to go back to the core problems and then figure out what solutions made sense in those contexts. Whereas at
Mm.
Atlassian or at a big company, those solutions are already in place. So you don't really get to benefit from the problem solving process of how you get to that. So for example, at Eucalyptus, I wasn't sure what my teammates were working on, so we introduced stand-ups, and then we weren't moving as fast in our sprints because who knows what. So we introduced retros to get some feedback and like talk about how we can improve our delivery processes. There's so many things like that that I've been able to witness firsthand, and obviously having the toolkit from Atlassian and from my previous experience to know what tools there are to deploy was super helpful. But I really feel like even in my role today, like having that experience has benefited me with new problems and new challenges that come up, because I'm able to go through that problem solving process again with any kind of new challenge that comes up. So even though it was quite shocking and quite overwhelming at the beginning, I think it really made me grow, and I'm really grateful for that. And yeah, in the beginning, I guess you focusing more on delivery and trying to launch things and prove the company, and you have to fight to survive. And the stakes are so much higher as well when you're joining in a early stage startup, whereas at a bigger company, you're more a cog in the machine and you're just contributing to what's already moving. And if you don't work on a bug or you don't work on something, then it doesn't feel quite the same as working on a huge kind of portion of what is ultimately a company that's trying to, either fundraise or change the world or like work on something really meaningful. I think that was something that I really liked, that I wanted to transition to. And for me, I really wanted to try something in the consumer space and work on something that was a little bit more personal and meaningful to people. And ultimately, that's what guided my decision to make the jump. And yeah, I've loved it. Absolutely loved it ever since.
I think a really good place to actually explore a little bit further is that it is often said that working in a startup requires you to learn incredibly quickly and generally at a pace that the company is growing at, if not faster. So then my question is, how did you keep yourself learning really fast at the speed of the company that's currently growing at, if not faster?
Yeah, you definitely feel that sense of, oh my gosh, things are so fast paced and I have to just keep my head above water to keep up. I think startups in general, especially in the early days, they tend to hire people who are already fast learners because they just have to hit the ground running and go with the momentum of the company. So I guess for me, I was really hungry and I really wanted to work in that environment. So it wasn't something that I had to come to terms with. It was just something I knew that was going to happen. So in the beginning of a startup or in the early stage, as I mentioned, you have to fight to survive. And in order to do that, you have to be a few steps ahead. You have to see what's coming up next. And there's always this feeling of trying to figure out what's happening next whilst you're doing the current thing. Something you grow to get comfortable with. And even in my role now, like where I'm 2 years into my time here at Eucalyptus, I have to continue to stop, take a moment and project out into the future. Because if I don't do that and then we end up at that point and I haven't set up the things in place to, mitigate risks or breaking or whatever it is, that's not going to work because we're going to break at that point. So, we want to, let's say, double the team. We need to make sure that we're putting structures and processes in place, working up towards that point so that we can continue to be effective and make sure we don't, I guess, bloat our team and end up not being able to support the engineers or not be able to deliver business value. Like those things you have to continuously think about. And the way that I've worked on this is, again, leaning on the problem solving kind of skill that engineers have, or not just engineers, like really everyone I've worked with at Eucalyptus are amazing problem solvers. I think leaning into that skill is huge. It'll take you very far. And then the guardrails that a company usually puts in place, like the company mission or OKRs or company values or goals, I think leveraging those to use as guardrails to then think about, okay, if this is the general direction of the company, this is how I can anticipate certain things that might happen, or this is how it's going to affect my team or affect me. And it's not so much about learning quickly. It's more about like seeing what's ahead and then incorporating that into your decision making in the short term and the midterm. And I also leverage lots of resources like books, and some of the things you tend to hit are already solved. So it's worth trying to find material that you can leverage to support yourself. And if you're able to find external mentors, they've been absolutely invaluable to me as well, just to bounce ideas off and talk to someone who's experienced those things, who optimizes the way that you solve problems, because you're able to understand, okay, this is the framework that I should use, or these are the traps that I should avoid. So those things, I think, altogether really help with adapting to that.
For the book side of things, is that very problem specific? Like depending on the problem, you're looking for books that may have solved that particular problem, or are you looking for like principle based books like that maybe a company have already got to a certain point that we want to aspire towards and just take what principles that they have and see if we can take inspiration from that?
Yeah, it definitely depends. I think for me, I really like reading stuff that is relevant to me at that time. That's just how my brain works. So I usually go looking for books or resources that have practical tips or solutions to an existing problem that I'm currently facing. But it does vary. Like if I don't, this isn't often the case, but if I don't have like lots of problems happening, I will then maybe reach for a book that's more about how a specific company became became successful in the state that it is today. And then I'll read through, okay, this is the history of the decisions they made. And I think reading stuff like that here and there is useful to just understand how other companies have done stuff. But in general, it's more like practical solutions.
Okay. Okay. That was really helpful for me. Like
No
that
worries.
was purely more of a selfish one, but who cares? Yeah, I think a really good way to at least wrap up this segment of our conversation is since the pandemic, I think the world have changed a lot from a technology standpoint, basically from an everyday life standpoint. A lot of things have changed. A common question that a lot of people wanted to ask you is what technology trends do you think that is here to stay, and what technology trends are like just gonna fizzle out?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think technology trends that I've seen, especially off the back of the pandemic, is more remote focused things. And even as a general culture, like I think personally, I really wanted to hire engineers who would be in office for most of the time.
Mm.
But more and more people are becoming more excited about the prospect of having flexibility with working from home. And I think there's more opportunities for having a lifestyle that you want whilst working in a remote setting. So we had to be a bit more flexible with that because we had to reflect what the market wanted. And I think that's also a good way to get more diverse hires as well, because you're able to reach more locations, potentially people who have certain lifestyles are more willing to work. So I think that's been a really good trend. And I think off the back of that, we tried using like a virtual office when we were all working remotely during lockdown. And I can see that becoming more of a thing where you still want to be able to connect with people in some like sort of tangible way. And like the remote office was just a really good way to do that. I didn't expect that, but it was like such a good way to like you log into work and then you jump into your office and you sit at your desk and you can talk to people by just like walking over to them. I thought that was pretty cool. And I think, the whole metaverse thing, like bringing the physical world into the virtual or the digital world, I think that's definitely going to be something that is just going to be accelerated by this whole pandemic. And I think the other thing is with more people at home and more people, at least from my personal experience, being at home a lot makes me focus on things at home. So I really like home automation now. So like having sensors around the home, so when you walk around the lights turn on automatically, or like having a robot vacuum. Maybe it's just me being lazy, but I really like it. And I think more and more people will have that as just like a normal part of their home and their life. And I think the other one is probably biotech. So working in healthcare, I think, has made me think more about how tech can influence health or influence a person's well-being or really help improve their lives. And it sounds cliche, but being able to work on that firsthand has really opened my eyes to that. So stuff in that space. I got a ancestry DNA kit for Christmas, so I've sent over my DNA samples and I'm going to find out about my genetic history and fertility tests and stuff like that. I think there's so much we can do there and so much more data we can get from innovations in tech in that space. And I'm really excited about that. In terms of like trends that'll fizzle out, I struggle with this one. I feel like trends, they kind of change over time and they build on top of each other. They don't necessarily like fizzle out so much. So I don't really have a good answer for that.
So I want to dig a little deeper on the metaverse side before we go into the next, I guess, theme I want to talk about. Metaverse is something that, like, ever since Facebook changed its name to Meta, that suddenly just went bonkers. That topic just like trend all over the place. Which part of the metaverse is actually tangible, and which part of it is actually more like a fad, if you will?
Yeah, it's I think I see this quite a bit. Like even Web3, I think is an example of that where it's been talked about a lot and publicized a lot, but it's still like not really tangible and it's like not super well defined in terms of like how it'll work and how I guess companies will be able to leverage that. Yet there's so much hype around it, which is just how tech is today. I think for me, like the tangible part is that, yeah, bringing that physical into the virtual, and we can see increments that's working towards that. And I guess Facebook making it a thing just meant that there's more visibility on it and more like chat about it. But there's like, it's hard to really know for sure until we see some real things come out of there. So I'm just holding my breath to see what happens in that space.
The next theme that I really want to talk to you about is that something that have became obvious to me over time is that in the computer science software engineering world, it seems like financial independence is something that's talked about quite often. I don't know if that is the case amongst like your household or even your friends and family. So I thought this would be a really good place to talk about. The tech industry is known to reward its employees pretty well. So when it comes to your own philosophy around money, what was it? Do you have a philosophy around money when you first started your career?
Yeah, I think the tech industry has lots of perks and rewards their employees really well because they have to be really competitive. There's so many different companies that now have perks and free food and free shirts and whatnot. Like, I think it's just become the norm. And that's what people expect now in that industry. And it makes sense because there's a shortage of people who have those skills. So being able to find the best talent, you want to show that your company is the best company to join. I think when I first started out in my career, my perception of personal finance was pretty basic. It was just like, get a good job, make sure it's stable, and then get a good salary off the back of that. And I think working in tech by that point where I was starting out was seen as a industry where there was pretty good job security and quite a few opportunities in that space. So it just made sense to me. And I think that's just what I really was aiming for to start with. And I think for me, I really wanted to also try and get scholarships or try and like find some sort of other stream of, I guess, income so that I could focus on studying, focus on working towards getting an internship, and then not having to worry about working part-time whilst I was heads down trying to get through my degree. And yeah, I think internships as well, they usually, I think they're paid, especially in the tech world, and that was another stream of income. But again, focusing on learning and growing and getting practical experience was really the main reason I did internships, not really the money side.
So it seems like that philosophy has a large inspiration coming from the household that you're already in. It seems like the industry itself is relatively very competitive in terms of comps. So from a philosophy standpoint, how does that change over time as you get deeper into your career, as your disposable income grows? Did that change for you?
Yeah, I think leaning more into RSUs and options, that was game changing for me. I didn't really know what they were before I started at Atlassian. And I think working at a unicorn and those things were just becoming a thing back then. I thought about, okay, if I can love what I do through my work, and if I invest my time and my energy in there, and in the long term I'm able to be rewarded through that, then yeah, I think it makes sense. While I'm still young, have relatively limited commitments, why not take a bit of a risk and see how that goes? And yeah, I think especially with joining startups, what I try to do now is go for the equity heavy kind of package and try and just like lean into that. So I think for me, it not only hopefully will be a good reward by that time that they vest. I think I really like feeling invested in the company, and the stakes are so much higher when you feel that investment, and equity is a great way to incentivize yourself to do that, not just from a financially independent point of view, but just from a mental point of view in your day to day. I think I really enjoy that. So that's shifted my view on personal finance now.
I think a point that's really worthwhile bringing up is that when we do get a chance to work at a startup, generally it's a compensation package with salary and equity options. These equity options will probably grow in value over time, depending on how valuable is the company at that moment in time. So I think I'm just elaborating because not everyone will get the opportunity to have options. And RSU stands for, I think is restricted stock units. Is that right?
Yeah.
So it's, again, very similar to the option side with startups, except it's public stock. I think it'll be really interesting for people to understand a little bit more in terms of, do you have a personal finance system now in terms of like how you approach that? Or is it still relatively the same, hasn't quite changed over that period of time since you started work?
Yeah, I do try to keep it quite simple just because I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about having a strategy and having a system. I just want something happening in the background that I'm feeling pretty confident with. So it hasn't changed too drastically. Still trying to earn like my main income stream through full-time employment, whether that's salary or equity in the long term. That's the main portion of that. And then investing in stock in industries that I'm familiar with. I think that's like another good way to, while you're young, try and invest in something, and hopefully over time that'll pay dividends. And then I think what I try to do is have some cash on hand as well, and making sure that I can at least live my lifestyle that I want. And if that's like the whole system, then that suits my lifestyle at this point. I think what I do regret is not investing in like ETFs earlier, or even investing in stock earlier, because if you have that over a long period of time, generally, as the experts say, it's a good strategy to have kicking that off while it's still in like your early stages of your personal finance journey. I think would have been good for me. I didn't do that, so that's probably something I would have changed. But yeah, in general, I think it's a pretty simple system.
Simple is good. So there's quite a few questions from the public that they wanted to ask, and I bucketed them into career focus and then like more like technology focused. And one of the first questions from the public is that people wanted to know whether if it's actually better for you to be a specialist or jack of all trades.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it does depend on what your goals are and what the situation is. I would say, in general and in my experience, it's good to be a jack of all trades, especially if you're starting out at a startup. What we look for as well is people who can usually work across like the whole stack or work end to end, because it means they can be flexible and adaptable to whatever is happening in the project at that time. It's like a very useful skill set to have in your team. And I like being across different problems and being exposed to different challenges. And I don't really like working on one specific thing all the time. Like I think I get a little bit bored through that. So for me, I like being a bit of a jack of all trades, so I can explore different projects and even different domains. Really, like tech again is so broad. So being able to work on a little bit of security, a little bit of back end, a little bit of front end, a little bit of design stuff, I think I personally really enjoy that. And then once you have like a pretty generalist kind of team, you can fill in the specialist gaps with people who are more specialized and more like experts in those fields. But broadly speaking, like it's usually good to have more of a generalist portfolio, I would say. But again, it depends on the situation, your goals. If you really love data, or if you really love front end, then yeah, you should definitely go hard on that specific domain if that's what you're passionate about. There's no reason to distract yourself with other things if you know what you want to work on.
I am on a similar boat. I have interest in multiple areas, and I find it very hard to like just focus in one thing. But I think the one more thing I also want to add is that quote that we always say, I think the jack of all trades quote is actually incomplete. The second half of that quote is, it's better than a master of one. That was the complete quote. That's just a fun fact. Anyway, we're gonna keep going. So another question that people actually were wondering is, what are your thoughts on skills or things that most tech people may undervalue but critical for long-term career?
I think this has changed over time, especially as teams become more and more collaborative. And even with the remote situation, like what I've seen more of a focus on is how well can an engineer or like an individual working in tech communicate, work with stakeholders, and be able to translate what's in their brain to an audience, whether it's in a virtual setting or in person. I think that's a key skill that is becoming more and more important in any role. I think that is something that you don't really get taught either. It's just something you have to pick up or like learn on the job. But that's something I would say is something that is fundamental to everyone we hire. And then documentation as well. And when you go through school, you study English, it's like, oh, I have to write these essays, I have to like write these reports. But documentation or like written communication is something that most companies really value. And of course, it's like a really good way to record decisions, a good way to do async decision making, a good way to share knowledge with people who may not be with you in a particular setting at a particular time. I think being able to write really good content that is, it depends on the outcome of the documentation, of course, but being able to write clear documentation that's very succinct or very like outcome driven to your purpose that people can understand, I think is a really core skill set that, again, people just brush off because they don't like English or like writing stuff, but it's a very crucial skill, I think.
I wholeheartedly agree on like the whole getting buy-in and helping the company understand why we're making certain decisions via like some kind of documentation. It's so underrated from the perspective that like just because you're good at your craft, it might not be enough to get everyone on board to steer the ship in a particular manner. So that's a great point. Thank you for that.
I've seen a few people, some people who have actually joined Eucalyptus, who have started out in a tangential engineering career, so chemical engineering, electrical engineering, and they've really found a passion for tech, and they've either pursued courses whilst they're at uni in that space, or once someone's graduated, they've done bootcamp classes to learn about web development and how you actually build applications, and then using that as a way to show, here's my passion, here's a practical example of what I've worked on, and then trying to get work experience. I think that is amazing, and I definitely encourage it. Obviously, I'm biased, but I love tech, and I think so many people have a place in tech, and seeing people find really what they love doing, and then even still using those core skills that they get from their engineering background that's not exactly comp sci, I think is still useful that translates through to tech. Again, it's that problem solving and then coming back to the core fundamentals of the thing that you're trying to build. I think that's really cool. So yeah, bootcamp classes or doing side projects as well is a great way to explore that.
Yeah, I have to say that tech is so much fun. Like even if you are not trained or technical in general, like I think from a marketing standpoint, as a marketer as well, like it's good to be able to speak the language of the engineers. So then you're not asking like absurd requests and not actually understanding the context. That is actually pretty difficult to do whatever you're asking them to do. So 100% agree on that one. Next one's a little philosophical, and it's so how has your conceptualization of what you want to be changed over your life?
How has your conceptualization of what you want to be changed over your life? I have this book that I used to keep at my bedside, and the title of it is It's Not How Good You Are, It's How Good You Want to Be. And that question reminded me of that. I think I was very academically focused growing up. Again, I think that was a factor of my parents like wanting me to do well and wanting me to succeed, and they moved from Indonesia to Australia, so they wanted to set me up with the best life I could have here. And I think they related that to being like doing well at school. And I think I really enjoyed, again, structure and then having, okay, these are the things I need to do, these are the marks I need to get, and then therefore I am successful because I'm doing well at school. And then once I graduated from school and then went to uni, that changed because all of a sudden I had all this freedom of choice. I could decide what degree I wanted to do, I could decide what courses I wanted to do, I could decide what full-time role I wanted to have. And for me, that was a struggle because I was always told what to do. I was always told how to be good, but now all of a sudden it was my choice. I think that was something that I had to overcome, which sounds strange, but yeah, I think my perception of what I wanted to be definitely changed because I didn't really know what I wanted to be at that point. And luckily I had tech and I really enjoyed that. And what I did was just go with the flow and just see where it took me and like just try to meet people in that space that really inspired me. And I think now I look back and I regret not having something that I was really truly passionate about growing up. I just focus on school. And even today, I struggle to find hobbies because it's just not how I'm wired. Like, it's hard for me to pick up something that I find interesting on a personal level and do it in my spare time. Like, it's just like not natural to me. So that's been interesting in terms of how I feel like I've changed over time. And like work, I really love work, but you can't work 24/7. So it's good to have something to switch off to, but that's sometimes hard for me to find. So I've tried to pick up hobbies here and there, especially with the pandemic, right? I think that put a lot of pressure on people to find hobbies and to find some sort of activity to do, because you're just trying to get out of the grind of like the day to day. So yeah, I think that's been a bit of a shift for me. And I'm just trying to be happy. It sounds like cliche, but moving from Atlassian to Eucalyptus, a lot of the motivation there was just to be happy. And I'm trying to just find things that keep me going and keep me happy. And luckily, I'm able to find that through my work, which I'm so grateful for. So yeah, and I don't really think about what's ahead or like what's in the future for me. I'm just happy learning every day and just growing as a person every day. And before that was not the case. I would always think about, okay, in 5 years, this is where I'm going to be, and this is the career ladder that I'm going to be stepping through. But I don't have that anymore. And I think that's just a factor of loving what I do. And as they say, if you love what you do, it doesn't feel like work. So yeah, that's kind of my mantra these days.
Fun fact, actually, I went through your Twitter feed and promise not stalking you, but like all the way at the bottom, now there was a mix. Are you still mixing music?
Oh gosh, I should take stuff off the internet. So yeah, I mean, speaking of hobbies, that was my attempt at trying to find something that I, enjoy doing. And the whole thing around hobbies is you lose yourself when you're doing it and you just forget about the world because you're just so like into that thing. And I really love music. I grew up playing piano like a classic Asian. And am I allowed to say that?
As long as it's okay with you, I say it all the time, but I'm just not sure.
So yeah, I have like a keyboard at home and I try and play it every now and then, but I also really like listening to music, like when I'm working or when I'm doing stuff. So I thought, oh, maybe I can try fiddling around with GarageBand, like one of the most like available basic mixing tools out there, just to see what it was like. And I actually really enjoyed it. And I'm not quite good at it yet, and I obviously need a lot of practice to understand all the different tools and stuff. But again, I really like how music and tech can merge to create this thing that you really like. And yeah, I put a pause on that. I've moved more onto animation. I'm trying to build that muscle up back again. So doing some 3D animation courses and tutorials and stuff, seeing if that's my shtick. So yeah, just trying to find hobbies where I feel creative, I think is really what that's all about. But maybe there'll be a debut album one day. I don't know. And I can like animate the music video as well.
Oh my God. Yeah, that should be a YouTube channel idea.
Yes. Oh, see, and then YouTubing can be my hobby as well, like you.
Move more towards serious, somewhat philosophical question as well. One of our good friends, if you will, is asking, is 3D printing the way of the future? Not sure how serious, but I think he was pretty serious.
Great question. Yeah, I remember when I was at uni, there was a 3D printer in my like uni society like office, and seeing that was like maybe like what am I? Like, I don't know, 10 years ago or something. Seeing how much it has progressed since then is amazing. I think, again, to me, tech is not about, it's not really about trends, or it's not really about like, is it the future? It's more about what problem is it solving for society. And there's so many applications of 3D printing now that are really awesome. Like being able to, from your own home, like print stuff that enables you to, I don't know, have a better setup at home, or using 3D printing in the industrial sense to create, like I've seen synthetic like body parts or robots able to have different parts made out of 3D printed parts. I think the stuff that it enables is really cool. And yeah, I definitely think it'll be more and more common in the future, like whether it's household or whether it's more in the industry. I think even houses, I've seen like videos of houses being 3D printed and stuff like that. So I think it's going to be a tool essentially in the future that people will continue to use. And it ranges from plastic printing to resin printing. And there's like all these different types of printing. I think the ability to model something and then see it like physically printed is super cool in its own right. So I think it's just something people will continue to play around with, even as a hobbyist. So yeah.
Yeah, I thought like, I guess when 3D printing first started, it was like these like small widgets. And then as time went by, like saw people printing houses at a fraction of the cost. And then there was, I think, a project from, I forgot which university it came from, but it was around printing housing for Mars. So
Yeah.
like you said, maybe it's more around whether the technology will solve the problem that we currently have at a cost-effective way.
Yeah, definitely. I think even like the underlying technology of 3D printers I've seen be used in different applications. I just watched a video of a robot that could paint nails, and it's like the same mechanism with like the axis thing. But I was like, that's so cool. And I love fashion and beauty and stuff like that. So seeing that was like, I need to get my hands on one of those things, or I need to like go to somewhere that has that. It was like literally like a little nozzle thing that could paint your nails. I was like, that's brilliant. But again, it's just me being lazy. But yeah.
Fair point. Last question, at least for this part. Where do you think the world is going with regards to big tech and in general human evolution?
That is a deep one. With regards to big tech, I think it's going to be a while till they're phased out. Like big tech has so much momentum, and they've got such good missions and so much like technology that enables new things. And like Amazon has just moved into so many different spaces, an example, and like Google as well is expanding into hardware and expanding into stuff beyond what I would even think possible back in the day with self-driving cars and AI and ML and like all that stuff. I think there's just so much resourcing and so much like money as well that's already been put into these companies. So for them to be phased out is like unlikely. But what I'm seeing is people are really interested in democratizing data and really trying to spread the power that these big tech companies have to back to the people. I think that's something that may, cause a bit of a disruption with big tech, but it's really hard to say exactly what will change. And again, like big tech is, I worked in big tech and I really loved working there. And I think people still enjoy being part of that world. It's from a like personal point of view, I think it's something that I'm still keen to see continue from juniors who join those companies. They turn out really awesome. They turn out really skilled. And I think that's the other side of big tech is like the actual company and the actual like growth that happens internally with the people that join there, I think is really awesome. So I think that'll continue. And then human evolution?
Yeah, human evolution. You don't have to answer that part, but I think they're just trying to understand like how we're going to evolve over time.
Well, I still haven't gotten COVID, so I feel like I am some sort of like super immune person, and maybe there'll be this like, I don't know, evolution of humans who are more immune to certain diseases, which is quite relevant to us today. But yeah, I don't know. That's a hard one to answer, I think.
So a couple of quick questions. I was wondering, like, because you read so much, and I guess like you partially answered some of that question. What are some of the books that you recommend everyone to read as part of, their own development?
Yeah, it depends on what path you're on. One book I do recommend all my new managers is The Making of a Manager by Julie. That book changed my life. When I was starting out in my management career, I felt really lost. I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't feel supported. I didn't know what the tools were that I could use. And reading that book just showed me that, hey, she's gone through these problems before. I'm alone. Here are some practical tips and solutions for you to think about to apply. And just reading that, I think, mentally put me at ease. I was like, okay, I can do this. Here's the handbook to work through it. That for me was like, yeah, I think it really helped me find my feet in my management career when I was starting out. So definitely that one if you're interested in a management path. And then another book that I really like because I'm obsessed with Pixar is, where is it? There it is. I mean, I have them all here as well in my little bookshelf. Creativity Inc., which is about how Pixar came to be. I mean, yes, if you love Pixar, if you love understanding, again, the history of how things come to be and how Pixar started out as a tech company and eventually faced problems that we face in a tech company today. I think the translation between animation company to companies today, I think is quite fascinating. So that was just like a bit of a light read, a bit of a like read on something that I was interested in. And then a final one I'd probably recommend is Essentialism. It's about like refocusing on your priorities and I guess really focusing on what is essential to you in your day to day. And as a manager, you get quite overwhelmed with everything that's flying at you and everything that comes on your plate. I'm sure you experience this as well. And I just feel a bit like overwhelmed, and reading this book helped me refocus and reframe about, don't have a laundry list of things to do. Have like your top 3 things you want to get done, and then be okay with saying no to these other things, and be okay with deciding that, okay, these are the things that are important to me, and these other things can maybe be delayed or maybe take a back seat. I think that was really good for my own personal kind of mental health to read through. And then I think the final book is definitely Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. I think it's like a classic one. I had all these preconceived notions of why I thought I was successful, and I was like working really hard, and that equated to success. But reading through that showed me that it's not just about that. It's also about being at the right place at the right time, and what your environment is growing up, and how that really shapes you when you make decisions in your day to day, and like how you evolve as a person with that environmental background. I think that was really interesting. Yeah, it made me think about that side of how people, why they are and how they come to be, and why it's important to have people with all those different backgrounds, because it's not just about, to me, it's not just about working hard, it's actually about your upbringing as well. So those are the books that I love and I would recommend.
I've read Outliers, I've read Creativity Inc. They're great, fantastic. I'll probably need to get the management book as well, because that'll be something that's super useful. Another like lightning fast question is, what is some of the worst advice someone has ever given you?
This is a hard one. I used to keep doing what you're doing. It's not really advice. It's just like, and I used to hate that. I was like, yeah, but give me some critical feedback. Like, give me some ways to improve, because there's always ways to be better and always ways to improve. And whenever I hear that, I'm like, that's not helpful in that context, at least when you're trying to grow yourself.
Last question, and it's been an absolute pleasure learning from you and also talking to you. Do you have a question for me that you want to ask me?
Oh, I guess first thing that comes to mind is you've joined Eucalyptus and moved into like a leadership role quite soon into your time here, and like taken the reins of a team that's quite new as well. What has that experience been like, and what has maybe been like the biggest hurdle you've had to overcome in that process?
Shit, I was not expecting that. Well, this is good. This is where like the conversation like gets a little fun. So I joined Eucalyptus when I was 3 months in. And I think I joined at a time that I was very fortunate that the company needed the skill set that I offer. So it was a match that was made, I would say match made in heaven. That's my perspective of it, at least. And I think the good thing is that the people that we work with and the problem that we solve is important. And the people that we work with to solve that problem is incredibly smart, and they're hungry. And I think that's what Eucalyptus, as a culture, I think that's what we offer. Because by the time you get here, it's like everyone's smart, everyone's pretty hungry, like, and we're solving the right problem, which makes it a pretty lethal combination. So I think my transition from an individual contributor to a more leadership role, one of my biggest struggles were I was having a tough time letting go of things. Like, that's not shown in the public. It's more like a mental thing that like how I used to attribute value is that I will do the work, I'll show the progress, and I justify that's the value I created for the company. And yes, I've done some small size leadership things in the past, but it was just this like, we grow so fast and the processes break, and we need so many team members, like the team just scaling so fast that you have to let go very quickly so that you can move on to the more important tasks. So the most difficult thing for me was letting go, that like someone else can take over that, and so that we can have time back to do the next important thing. That was by far one of the toughest things that I think I had to do so far, at least mentally.
Yeah.
Do you want me to talk about how I overcome that?
Yeah.
I think part of the challenge of overcoming that is accepting that it's not about your individual performance anymore. It's like about the team's performance to achieve the company's vision. That's why you're in a capital allocation role, right? That's really your job. And I think you have to mentally commit to that, almost like a marriage, right? You have to mentally like it's happening. This is happening. And you're either swimming against the wave or you can go with the wave. And once you decide that, it makes life a lot more easier to lead the team.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with the transition from IC to manager. Your output is different. You, as an IC, you're working on your task, you have something tangible to output. But then when you're a manager, your real focus is how do you multiply your impact through your team? And your team is the ones who, working on that vision with you. And I think for me, I also had that adjustment of, oh, okay, I'm not the one doing the thing, but I have to like trust the team to do it and like ensure that we're all at least on the same page and heading in the right direction, but they're the ones who are really outputting it and I'm just there to guide. And yeah, I think you're doing a great job and like the team is obviously doing really well. So yeah, I think you overcame that pretty seamlessly.
Well, hopefully we can keep that going. It hasn't been easy, but yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I think this is a great way to wrap our conversation. It's been like this roller coaster ride of like talking about your career to personal finance to like answering some very philosophical questions to talking about role models. Well, thank you so much for your time, Davina. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.